This is Mark's 1970 Fairlane. This is the first car we ever built on the skid factory, and over the years it's undergone a few upgrades. In its current form, it's got a built Toyota 1UZ, a Hughes Performance, Turbo 350 and bolt together converter, and a Rogan Industries 9-inch diff. The thing with performance cars is there's always room for improvement, so today on the skid factory, we're chasing more power.
Welcome back to the Skid Factory. Before we begin, you're probably wondering where Kevin is. Don't worry, he's safe. He's just chilling on the hoist over there, awaiting surgery. If you want, you can represent Kevo by grabbing a t-shirt, available at the store.
Limited edition.
Limited edition, not really. You can buy one anytime. So represent. Anyway, enough of Kevin. Such an attention whore. This week, we're playing around with the Fairlane. This has sort of been sitting on the bench for a while, waiting for us to get time to do it in between all the crown stuff. So we finally got the crown out of the way, and now we can do these upgrades. The Fairlane's been soldering on for a couple of years now since we put the built engine in and upgraded a few things, and then eventually upgraded the transmission as well. Performs really well. It's done a few long road trips and no dramas at all. It does have a few little problems with it that we really wanted to address at some point. One of them is that it, for some reason, wants to get hot, and it never did before we put the built engine in it. The Hoff reports that isn't uncommon for 1UZs once you put big cams in them. I don't know why, but we've got a fresh radiator in there. It's got another fan on it. We've done sort of everything that we can think of to try and alleviate it, but it still is a little bit angry and gets a bit hot when it's sitting around in traffic. So that's one problem. The other problem is everything is too small. We're pushing about 600 horsepower at the wheels at the moment, and we put a coolant pressure sensor on it, and when Kai tuned it, he was seeing what's basically just restrictions everywhere, causing like high inlet temperatures and the sort of stuff that will damage the engine if you keep going that way. So we've kind of like lowered it down from the power that it was making, and now it's kind of like you just got to replace stuff. The turbo's not big enough. The intercooler is definitely not big enough. It's only 3 inches thick, and just an eBay thing that we originally put on it. Unfortunately, with that, you can't put anything bigger on there without completely ruining the front of the car. So we've, because of that, we've had to sort of think outside the box a bit. Fortunately for us, because it's got this holly top on it with our adapter that you can also buy from the store, it allows us to look into a range of products that are made for the LS engine. So what we can now do is get rid of that intercooler in the front, the air-to-air, and pop the lid off the holly top and use a water-to-air intercooler. There's a few different brands available for that. We've actually gone with one from 417 Motorsport, which is, the owner is a friend of Pete, our friend over in Texas, so we've gone with that one. Hopefully it's just going to bolt on. I think it will. It's a pretty flash bit of gear. So that intercooler can go, that turbo can go. We've got to change the intake plenum around a bit, put the new turbo on, and make some stuff.
What happens if it doesn't fit under that freshly made bonnet?
It will fit.
Are you sure?
I'm sure. That's why it's got a big hump in it. This is pre-planned, it's all good.
Never underestimate the strength of Toyota black sealant.
Whose idea was this?
Hey Al, that's a really nice shirt you've got on there.
You know where you can buy one?
Where's that?
At www.theskidfactory.com. Not enough W's? Free to take over.
You want me to do it?
I think you've got backwards elbow, haven't you? You need it. about to cover up the shit's welds.
What shit's welds? Come on.
Can't see them anymore. So. We've got it all back together now. It looks like it all fitted pretty easily, but that's probably a little about half the story. The turbo itself, it did bolt straight onto the existing manifold because it's got a T4 split flange on it. It's a Borg-Warner based turbo, so an S300. 7275 is probably how you would say it in the current lingo of talking about turbos. So 72 mil inducer on the compressor and 75 mil exducer off the turbine. They're not normally ball bearing, but this one's been, it is for some reason, I don't know why. So it's pretty, it should do the job. It's a logical step up from what was on there, which is just worked really well for what it was, but we just were pushing it farther than it was sort of capable of. But because it's so much of a larger turbo than the original one physically, like compressor cover sizing, we had some problems that it wouldn't fit against the thermostat housing that's originally bolted sort of adjacent to it. So what we've done is remove the thermostat altogether, weld up the bypass section on the top coolant bridge, and I've made a new lower outlet that goes down into the bottom of the radiator, so it no longer has the thermostat function. Some people will probably squeal about this, but at the end of the day, this car does not need a thermostat. We live in a warm climate. It heats up very, very quickly, and thermostat functions probably mostly to make your heater work really fast, to be honest. Most modern engines have got restriction built into the cylinder head themselves to control their own coolant flow. The thermostat's just a secondary control. So all that worked out pretty well. In the meantime, we had poked our head in around the timing belt area and found out that water pump was leaking and the seals were leaking. It's only got about 20,000 Ks on it. It is getting increasingly more difficult to get decent sort of replacement parts. Stuff like that should last hundreds of thousands. So we've got in there and replaced it all. There's nothing else we could do, so we pulled it all apart. New water pump, new seals, a timing belt because it had a bit of oil on it. We've also, part of the job here was we've got no intercooler pipes anymore because the intercooler is here. So there's no need to have pipes running around the engine bay, which is a good thing because it was very cramped anyway. One of the challenges was the turbo and the throttle body are right next to each other, so it makes it quite difficult to get a pipe route to join them together when you don't have any intercooler piping to speak of. So we ended up we tried a whole bunch of different things to do it, but because of its proximity so close to each other, we ended up using the original silicon bend that was on there, so 4-inch to 3-inch reducer, 90 degree, and I just modified the outlet of the compressor cover with a slight angle to suit, and it's a pain to get on there, but it shouldn't need to come off very often, so it's all good.
It's a lot easier than trying to work with alloy too, so.
Yeah, I mean, you can only fabricate so when everything's that close to each other, you just can't get the shapes very easily. So that'll do the job. It was on there before, and it was okay. So it's just only one thing to blow off now, so that's a good thing. We did it. Speaking of blow off, segue. There's the original blow off valve, the GFB SV52, is now welded to the compressor cover right underneath the outlet. I kind of did that to trigger people to tell me that it's not supposed to be there, but it's venting air out of the intake system. That's all it does, so it doesn't matter where it is, it'll still do that. Brett from GFB said the only thing he could see as being a problem is it might blow the paint off the bottom of the throttle body. And that is not an issue for us. We've tilted the radiator back forward so it's standing up right now. It was only like that to clear the intercooler, so that's given us plenty of room around the turbo. We're just going to leave that as is. It should work perfectly fine. It's a fresh radiator. We have fitted the intercooler radiator, which is out the front here. It's just Mark just bought it off eBay. It's just a generic intercooler radiator. Should be more than enough for this setup. We've fabbed up this tank to hold it's basically a fill tank or a header tank for the coolant for the intercooler. most of the time I try and use stuff that you can just buy off the shelf because it's much easier, but in this case there was nothing around that would fit in the limited space, so we just shot up the road to see Matt at Rogan Industries, and he folded me up some bits of aluminium off a mud drawing, and I just welded it up, and it's turned out really nice. The whole system is plumbed with dash 12 hose, so 3/4 inch hose. That's pretty much the standard for water air intercooling, unless you're going into crazy drag race and stuff where it's much bigger. So that's all ready to go. We've mounted a pump down low. It's a Bosch pump from Raceworks. It's basically intercooler specific. That's what it's designed for. It's a fairly big unit. So it's circulating really nicely. Wired it up. I just added a relay next to the thermofan relays, and it's just run off the ignition, so it's always running. The next job is to replace the fuel pumps in the back and update all that to suit the new power level. I've already replaced the injectors from 1000cc to Raceworks 1650s, so that should be more than enough for this car. I hope we never have to replace them again. We'll probably have to replace the engine before they run out. So they're all good to go. I've gone into the Haltech and just changed all the injector data, and that's enough for it to run as tuned, so it's pretty handy for that sort of stuff. All that data is available on the Raceworks website as well. It's very well documented, all your pump data, injector data and everything, it's all there for you. There's no secrets. I've already had the engine running up to temp, everything's working great. The last thing to do before the dyno is to go down into the boot and replace that fuel system, and we'll be ready to go. The current setup is something that we fitted back when we put the built motor in there. It's two Bosch 044 pumps. There's a pump underneath that feeds out of the fuel tank from the original spot and pumps into this surge, runs up to the front and comes back, same as usual. So that works great up till about now. So like they're pretty good pump for up to about 600 horsepower at the wheels. So the reason why we need to replace the whole thing is that this tank is actually built specifically to hold those pumps in there like that with an O-ring setup, and you can't put any other type of pump in there other than them. So what we're doing is replacing it with this Raceworks setup. These are relatively new. Been wanting to use one of these for a bit. So it houses two Walbro pumps in there, or TI they're called now, of various sizes. It's basically just a reference to that size there, which I think is 40 mil. So the pumps just slide up there. You use the clear hoses that just sort of press over. And then it comes out the top into AN fittings. You can have 8. We're going from 8 to 6 because this is all dash 6 already. So theoretically we can just undo all those pipes, undo the wires, pull that thing out, load that in there and connect all the hoses back up, in theory. So that's what we're going to attempt to do. The replacement of the tank was a relatively simple process with pretty much everything just screwed back on where it came off, apart from one hose which we shortened. So that was pretty simple. The devil's in the details as usual. We have replaced all the wiring to these pumps, and the reason for that is that these late model large base pumps use a lot of power. You can't just put them in place of a standard pump without upgrading the wiring. They rate them at 17 amps at 3 bar, whereas the 044s were 10 amps, but don't believe that. They will melt wiring, melt connectors, melt everything. Put way bigger wiring than you thought you needed in it, and you might be right. We won't even use 40 amp normal mini relays anymore because they kill the relays. So too many times the stuff should be more than enough, and it's just not. So
What are those big dog relays you got? What are they?
they're 50 to 70 amp depending on who writes the blurb on the packet. But yeah, they're the next size up from just a basic relay. Much bigger power transfer terminals on them. Even better again, if you can get them, which we couldn't today, is a solid state relay, which is another good way of doing it. So yeah, be careful. Even if you put them inside a fuel tank, you've got to put bigger wires to them because they eat power. So that's all done. She's all buttoned up. We've thrown away 5 years worth of crap that Mark kept in his boot for some reason. There was stuff that we'd put in there when the car left 5 years ago. So I'm pretty sure he doesn't need it, so we've given her a bit of a clean up. There's a bit of a mess in here, which is unlike Mark. He's normally a clean freak.
Why's it got like 4 seats in there?
He's got a lot of butts. He's got like 4 lawn chairs. Maybe it's just for when he parks on the grass and sits there and stares at it lovingly.
Maybe.
But that could be a thing. Also, don't forget, you've got to fill your surge tank up before you enable the pumps that are inside the tank. Otherwise, your surge tank may never get filled. So we've done all that process as usual. She's fired up. Everything's ready to go. We're ready to take it down to see Kai and get a tune and see what happens.
I just had PTSD of when we first built this thing and the tank was so dirty that the lift pump was getting clogged with ruts.
Fairlane's bolted onto the dyno down here at Night Family Motorsport. Kai's here ready to go do some tuning. This has been tuned here before by Kai after we fitted the Turbo 350 and 9-inch to it. At the same time, we also changed the ECU over to an Elite 2500, added a bunch more sensors and control stuff, and Kai tuned it. It made 570 horsepower at the wheels. That's a little bit different number to what it was tuned the first time, but you've got to remember it has had a different transmission and diff and a much looser torque converter fitted in between. So forget the first number. We're worried about the difference between the last time it was here and this time.
The old red line and then this green line, they're a couple pounds different. Like it's like a pound difference. But you look at the increase in power, like you got to remember these top lines here, if you go back, we were running 24 pounds of boost before, and look, we're nearly there. That's only 15.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's what I said. I think you'll find this will come back to efficiency. You know what I mean? Where we're making a lot of power for not a lot of boost. That's just makes a happy engine.
Make sure you've got a full tank of fuel when you come to the dyno, and also make sure your plugs are changed before you get here, unlike us. The plugs are working okay, but because they're second-hand and pretty worn out, you can't read them correctly. So we're putting a new set of plugs in, And I believe we're changing the heat range, Scott.
We're going to change the heat range, yeah, absolutely. Just this new turbo setup is very efficiently making power, so we'd like to have the ability to safely run into higher power levels if we want to.
Sweet. And everything's looking good apart from old plugs?
We did give it a couple little hits. We gave it a gate pressure hit, and then we did a 14-pound hit, and then we've just done a 20-ish pound hit. And so far, it seems pretty conclusive. It's about 70 horsepower up at the same boost pressures than the old setup. And it seems to come on almost exactly the same. It's like a light switch still. It just comes straight up.
That converter though, gap guarantee, bros. With some fresh plugs in the engine, Kai's done another pull, made about 650, about the same as before. And then now we've pulled the plugs out. And Kai, what have you found and what are we looking at?
Alright, so we wanted to pull all 8 again because it's a new manifold setup and stuff, and we just want to see what's going on. We have seen that there are 2 cylinders in the engine that are definitely showing they're running leaner than the others by looking at the burn ring on the plug. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw some corrections in there based on what I've seen previously that'll clean this up. Nothing terrible. Like actually, you know, 6 of the plugs look almost identical, which is great, and then we've got 2 that I want to throw a little bit extra fuel in.
And those 2 are at the
opposite corners.
opposite corners of the engine,
Yeah.
so 1 and 8.
Yeah.
So with the Haltech Elite 2500, you can then make a table where you can add fuel just for those cylinders.
Correct. Yeah. So we can do that, and not only that, we can add fuel to those cylinders, and I'll scale it so that it's under high boost pressures, so that we're only adding the extra fuel to those cylinders when we actually have the in-cylinder environment that warrants it, so to speak. We're trying to manage cylinder temperature.
This is where EGT sensors come in handy too, is that right?
Absolutely. So if you don't have EGT sensors, that's why we read the plugs. And even if you do have EGT sensors, you'll find a lot of the top race teams still read the plugs.
Yep.
We had a couple of goals with this update on the Fairlane. More power, which everyone always wants, via more efficiency, and also a reduction in coolant temperatures. And it looks like we've achieved both of those goals, and they kind of work in together with the modifications done. I drove it down here today. Coolant temperatures were sweet as. It doesn't get hot anymore, so we're super happy about that. As far as engine efficiency goes, I'm going to pass over to Kai because he is the master at this and he'll explain it to you.
Yeah, so when we look at efficiency, we were looking at the amount of horsepower for boost pressure that the car was running. So we ran it at similar boost pressures to what we ran the old setup at, and round numbers, the car was about 70 horsepower better at the same boost pressures. We've then gone through and sort of extracted to the efficient limit of this setup. We have netted it's about 120 horsepower up on what it was making previously, but the biggest things we were trying to hit was the intake air temperatures. Previously we were seeing the intake air temps getting up to sort of 80 to 85 degrees Celsius and beyond, which is definitely a bit of a danger zone, which we weren't happy with. Just then, we've just put down at more boost pressure than we were running previously. It's only getting about a 16 degree rise of intake air temperature through a pull, which is excellent considering we were coming from, what was it? It was about a 50 degree rise before. So we've gone from a 50 degree rise to a 16 degree rise.
So that's not necessarily due to just that intercooler. It's due to the turbo being bigger and more efficient as well. Without measuring it coming out of the turbo, we don't really know, but the main thing is that it is efficient. And Kai's said I would leave it here, and that's at about 690 horsepower if we round it up a couple of
tenths.
Little tenths.
I'd round that up to 700.
Yeah,
Come on,
let's round it up to
always add that sauce to the salad.
Yeah.
Come on.
So it's obviously going to be pretty spirited at that. It already has run 656, I think, on the 8th, which is equivalent to around about 1020.
Yeah.
So it was already fast, and now it's got 120 more horsepower. So it's obviously going to be a lot faster. So there's no need to go hunting for every last bit of power. This engine is great, but it does have its limits, and we know what they are, and we don't want to go anywhere near them. So we're happy. We're going to leave it at that. It's going to be fun to drive. It's going to be fast, and Mark's going to get kicked off the track for going too quiet.
Next year on the Skid Factory, Mark's back for...
Mark gets a roll cage.
Never
and a
ends.
parachute.
Once again, massive thanks to Kai for the tuning work, and also more valuable to us is him sharing his knowledge and with both us and you guys. So it's really cool for you to tell us what's going on with this stuff. Like, I've been doing this for years, but I don't know everything. I don't know about spark plugs. Well, I do now, but yeah, so it's really cool. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. You know where to find him. Facebook, Instagram and all that stuff.
Yep.
Night Family Motorsport if you want to tune.
Or at the racetrack.
Or at the racetrack with a laptop. That's all we got. We'll probably come back to the Fairlane once we get out on the track and show you how well it goes. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Ready to catch, Keon?
Hey! What's up, man? Do you want to know what it was? This stuff is very sticky. Give me a beer to do a dumpy.
Oh, yeah. I don't reckon that's like
That's your
milk factory spec.
Yeah, it's 316, bro. Sweet, it's a milk factory.
It's 409. And the inside of it's mostly bits of filler rod.
Just say something to the camera.
Don't hit your head on the boot. Pro tip. Old man yells at cloud. Welcome back to the skid factory. Before you... Welcome back to the skid factory. Before you... Oh my God.
It's happening. It's
Before they...
Right on. Sweet. Right on. Right on.
Right on.
The blower valve gives the crank angle sensor connector a bright flogging. You might have to hide it out of the way. We're reporting live from Night Family Motorsports dyno cell number 1. We've got the Fairlane on the dyno. We're cranking up that boost and we gotta see what's gonna happen.